Thank you, guys. And I will start just with the first question. Something you said, Steve, really stuck out to me amongst a lot of cool stuff. But you said we never thought back when we were 22 that this would be what we would build. And you kind of heard Mark Zuckerberg say something similar this week when he was testifying on the Hill. This is something he started in a dorm room. And I've had similar conversations at an event I do. We had Ev Williams and a lot of the Twitter executives talking about Twitter in a similar way. So there are these ideas that are born, in dorm rooms, in small spaces that kind of become and have become these incredibly powerful forums that are very complicated. Can you speak to a little bit to that process and how your mindset has changed to the responsibility you now have kind of on a larger social scale?
Sure. So, the responsibility is, I think, a really good way of framing this. So when we started Reddit, and for the first few months we faked all of the content on Reddit. We were building a community site, but we had no community. But nobody wants to join an empty community, so we had to make it look like there was stuff there. So Alexis and I submitted all the content for the first few months, and our motivation then was, as I said before, is not to look. We didn't want to look silly in front of our investors who believed in us. So I remember the first day very clearly when Reddit worked on its own, where we didn't submit any content and there were real users there. And that's when our motivation shifted to, okay, now we have a responsibility to our users. We still didn't yet, have that kind of mission of bringing community and belonging to everybody. But we felt like we had a duty, like people were showing up on Reddit and they were getting value out of it, in entertainment and news and community. And so every day we just thought, okay, what can we do to, uphold that and enhance that? And so now 13 years later, now that we have hundreds of millions of users, that duty is even greater because it's not just, news and funny stuff and tech news, right? It's people come to us when they're going through really difficult times in life. People depend on us when there's world disasters to communicate. And people come to us for an authentic view of what's going on in the world. And with that comes to us a great responsibility to uphold that. And that's the way we think about it now.
What is the balance between kind of you upholding this community versus you imbuing values into this community? I mean, where do you stand on that right now, and what do you hope the Reddit community stands for?
So one of the things that the recurring theme is let people be people, and that people, I think, are naturally creative and collaborative. And so the values come from our user base, and our role is to make sure that Reddit is a fair and open platform. For example, that the views expressed on Reddit, the volume of those views is in proportion to the volume of those views in the real world, right? That the content's not being manipulated or unfairly controlled by anybody. And these days, right, we can talk about Russia and foreign entities, but even over the years, it's a group of friends cheating or a brand trying to get free advertising. Or what have you. And so that's always been something that we thought is very important, is give people the space and make sure that space is fair.
Jigar, we were speaking a bit backstage just about this moment we're in with the concepts of regulation and getting tech and government and policymakers to speak the same language. And that's not just happening in the US, but I mean, I'm engaged in efforts in Brussels as well with the EU, and the fact that has to happen, that bridge has to be solidified. Speak a little bit to that tension and where you think we're going.
Well, I think that for us, it's an easier process than I think is for the tech industry, because, a lot of folks, I think in California for a long time have been sort of libertarian about it, right? It's sort of, just let us do our thing and create all this value and do amazing things and don't over-regulate us, right? Whereas in my industry, I haven't had that luxury because I am by definition regulated, right? Electric utilities are regulated, water utilities are regulated, roads are regulated. That is what I do, is regulated. And so the values piece is important to me, but it's also direct, right? the my success like means that coal miners in southwestern Virginia lose their job, right? My success means that these coal plants are shutting down, these other things are happening, et cetera, right? And so we are constantly engaged in these conversations about what happens, right? It's not unlike sort of the whole point behind the Aspen Institute and some of these other areas around having this conversation. And I do think that it has come time to say, like, well, it wasn't like, we've all like sort of watched Mad Men, right? And actually not so many people did. Their numbers were actually lower than people thought. They had like bigger water cooler
They had a big
stuff.
brand.
Yeah. But things weren't hunky-dory in the 60s. Like folks were like pushing, like weird chemicals and peanut butter and all sorts of stuff, right? And it's the same now, right? I mean, like most of these companies are big advertising companies, right? And so we just need to have a conversation about what we are going to allow to have advertised to you and whatnot. And I think that all of us have a responsibility, particularly when we make this kind of change in the world and this kind of disruption in the world, to engage in that conversation, not like out of compliance, but out of genuine sincerity, because we actually want to make sure that, a country of 330 million people and a world which has 7 billion people, like gets integrated into it.
I mean, we have to admit that, and I say this as I hate this term, a millennial or a digital native, or whatever it is, this period that we're in right now is probably the most negative around tech and entrepreneurship, more of the tech Silicon Valley scene than I've ever experienced in this whole digital wave. Yet, I still personally remain such an optimist around digitalization and the values of the internet and where we're going, but I'm not an expert. I want to ask both of you, in the world of social media and the internet and these open forums and dialogue, is this a blip? I mean, is this just a bad period? Where is all of this going?
I mean, we're definitely in a difficult time. But I mean, I'm also an optimist, and I think one of the things that we're observing right now is, or the way I like to look at it is, we are testing our values. I think as people and as Americans, and your values don't mean anything until you test them. And while the medicine doesn't taste good right now, I think that's what we're going through. And or to put it another way, for a third metaphor, we're building up our immune system. And so I think it feels like we're sick right now, but I think we're developing antibodies. And I have this hypothesis that if we don't change anything, I mean from like a law point of view or a technology point of view, we will probably actually come out of this. Now, that may not be an option. I think a lot of things are going to change, and I think in many ways that's probably a good thing. But really, at the core of what's going on is we as people, I think, let our guard down and are now paying the price, and our guard is back up. And I don't think we'll go through this again.
I'll give you an example. My wife used to run the budget office within the State Department, and I remember meeting a gentleman who was in charge of social media for the State Department. And I remember him saying, there's a guy who basically is in Brazil who is basically just a homebody, but he's organized like 800 generals across Brazil to like rise up against this stuff, right? And then he was tracking the stuff in Tunisia and Egypt and whatever, right? And at the time that I talked to him, this was at the Aspen Institute, I remember he didn't see any downside to this, right? The fact that like one person in their dorm room or in their like room could just like create a revolution just like using online tools, right? Like there was no like, it was like, well, this is great because all these dictators are being taken down, which was kind of great, except that it created a vacuum of power in these places where ISIS came in, and now we have to deal with that. And like, I just think the full ramifications for how the world works is important, right? And right now, we basically have the personification of libertarianism, like as President of the United States. And where he's just sort of mouthing off whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And I just think that like for someone like me, the reason it matters is like I'm not, obviously, in a bad place. I live in a affluent community and have all the things that I need. But I do make investments on a 25 to 35 year basis, right? So I want to know like are people going to use the water that we're putting in here? Are they going to use the electricity we're putting in here? And so planning and stability actually matters in a world where we're sort of throwing out stability.
I'm going to keep going, but if anyone has any questions, this is your chance to line up. Come on, get going. Okay, someone's here first. I'm very proud of you here. Go ahead.
For me? Yep. So I think one of the big things that's going on right now is tech versus media, right? And what I'm wondering about is, like, Reddit is the #4 site on the web according to Alexa, and there's only so many top 10 sites. There's exactly 10, and when you look at the traffic for those, you see that media sites then fall into like the top 100, and then blogs fall into much longer tail than that. So I'm wondering, do you think that in the States already we have a strong and independent digital media? And then when you look globally, do you think that that's true? And then do you think that Reddit has any responsibility, or that tech companies have any responsibility to figure out some way to make that true?
One more time, the core of your question was the state of media?
Yeah, so whether it's free, independent, and whether there are enough media companies
Does it
that
matter?
and whether that matters.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just give you my perspective. The way I think about it is Reddit is fundamentally a distribution platform. We aren't trying to be, and this is different from some of our peers. It is not our goal to be a media company. It's not our goal to force all of the content to be on Reddit. In fact, we started off as 100% outbound links to everything. Now we do actually host a lot of content, but we've never been prescriptive about that. So I do think one of the changes we're going through, the biggest change, is how do people access content? And it seems funny there is a lot of duplicated effort out there, but the content, the production of that content, whether it's from an amateur, a blogger, a professional, I don't think where that content is hosted is particularly important. I just think that it is created and consumed is important. And so whether somebody is reading journalism linked to by Reddit or hosted on Reddit or somewhere else, I don't think is important, but I think everybody, all of those people in the ecosystem can and will continue to exist, and that's the part I think is the core importance.
So you said some of your peers are not as open about sending traffic, I guess, and outbound links. Do you think that that's an essential thing for the internet to work well, that the traffic actually gets sent to independent sites, and that sites operate independently of Reddit and Facebook and Twitter and these other platforms?
I think so, yes. I mean, the web, right? The word web and World Wide Web, and the fact that anybody can create and host content, I do think is really important. And that's where I think where our philosophical opinion on this is it should be a meritocracy, right? Everybody should have a fair shot. This is why we care about things like net neutrality. And this is why, just as a business, we've sometimes to the detriment of our business, have eschewed some of the more, I think, aggressive growth tactics we could have taken, and have generally avoided tactics that would require locking people in and doing exclusive content deals and that sort of stuff. Because fundamentally, I just don't think that's not what the internet is to me. That's not the internet I grew up with, and we want to be enhancing the ecosystem and not taking it over and detracting from it.
I'm going to go to my friend here. I will say, although I fully enjoy the multi-pronged approach, let's limit to one question, please.
Yeah, so you mentioned energy policy and how it's, energy is a public good and it's thus regulated. I would love both of your guys' takes on the fact that companies like Facebook and Google providing networks and information could almost be seen as a public good and maybe should be regulated as such. And I think I've seen some people on like CNBC and like other people starting to give this argument forward. I would love your guys' take on it being on two sides of the regulation coin.
Yeah, look, I think that regulation comes from folks not self-policing well, right? I mean, I think Reddit's done a pretty good job of being like sort of responsive to consumer needs. I think the other companies have done a horrible job of being responsive, right? And so at some point, right, I mean, I don't know that this is that complicated, right? At some point, if I really want to connect with my family members on Facebook, right, and I don't want all of the baggage that comes with it, I'm absolutely going to go to my elected official and say, hey, guess what? Under this statute, which I've actually memorized and Facebook has never heard of, we can actually convert Facebook into a public utility. And we should actually regulate it through the FERC. And that's going to happen because Facebook's not smart enough to figure it out, and the rest of us are going to be pissed off enough to actually do it, right? And this is the thing that I don't understand about Silicon Valley, right? Is that at some point, right, like you can't just sell rainbows and unicorns. Right, like autonomous vehicles, for instance, right? Yeah, they're awesome until like some woman gets killed like crossing the road in Arizona and there was no regulation. Do I think autonomous vehicles should stop going forward? No, we lose 37,000 people a year in this country to car accidents, and another 1 million people get maimed every year from car accidents, right? Like, yeah, I think that should be avoided, and autonomous vehicles is the way to do it. But doing it without regulation basically ensures that when something like this happens, that you're gonna like see like the firm fist of regulation.
My tall friend here. Okay. No, behind you.
I'm not
Aren't
exactly
you? Oh, okay.
I'm not that tall.
No. Oh, I thought you already asked a question.
Oh,
Never
no,
mind.
I have a question
Sorry.
for Mr. Huffman. No worries at all. Mr. Huffman, I just want to say first, thank you. I'm a moderator on a 60,000 member subreddit.
Oh, well, thank you.
And well, thank you for giving us the tools.
No, thank you.
Well, in case anyone doesn't know, I feel like this platform is unique. You enable people to have honest, unfettered discussion, and the feedback we get is just this place is a sanctuary. It's a place where people are like, I can't talk to people in real life about these issues. We talk about some of the, climate change, resource depletion, things that people can't exactly go have a small chat with, but people can connect from all over the world. And my question, sorry, I just want to say,
great. I know, I love it.
I'm a fan, I just
I
want to
love
say
it.
thank you. But as communities grow, how can they maintain integrity and stick to their, the subject matter that brought them together in the first place?
It's a really great question. And it's something actually I'm personally spending a lot of time thinking about right now because this is really key for both our business need of survival and to fulfill our mission of bringing community and belonging to everybody on the planet. We still have a lot of growing to do. And we've kind of taken it one step at a time, right? We had one community, no comments. Then we added comments, which is where the stuff really started happening. Then we allowed users to create communities, and then we created moderators. And now I think we need to actually evolve the way governance on Reddit works. And make sure, I think the only governance that scales with user growth is governance from users. Right? There's no way that we can employ enough people or enough volunteers can moderate to cover all of the surface area of Reddit unless everybody has a hand in it. Mm-hmm. And so there's both a kind of a social aspect to this, where I actually just think it's very fun to think about government styles that have worked or not in the real world and how that applies to Reddit. And then also from a technology point of view, things that we can do that maybe don't have real world analogs to enhance this. So I could spend all day talking about this topic, and I won't, but I think you raise a really good issue, which is how do we continue to put responsibility into the communities so that they can grow and protect themselves.
I'm definitely not the tall guy you were talking about.
I am never going to live
okay.
this down. Yeah. I can't see well from up here. Okay.
So, as a business owner in the renewable energy space, to be honest, I haven't really explored Reddit a whole lot. I mean, I've known that it's out there, and obviously all my friends are using it. But as a business owner, I've never looked at it either from that sense. And I'm wondering, I guess my question is for Jigar. Jigar, have you ever read an energy market related subreddit? And if you have, do you find any value in it? And if not, will you? For any, what do you see as the intersection between what you do and Reddit, and how can that network help us as from a business perspective?
So the answer is yes, I have. I graduated from college in '96, right? So I didn't actually experience Reddit in its truest and most wonderful form in like 2005 or 2006. But so a couple of years ago, I think they asked me to do an AMA. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
And so I was like, hey, I should figure out what this is before I do one, right? So I went on there, and the thing about Reddit is that you actually have to participate. You can't just read, because the problem with just reading is it's sort of like, you're just gonna get lost. But just the quality of the people that are like providing content is so high that you just learn a ton, right? Like on obscure issues, right? Because like our stuff by definition is almost always obscure, right? So you have this community of people who care about obscure issues and give us the knowledge needed. So yes, you should be more involved in Reddit.
Thank you.
So I guess my question is, inside of the kind of founding story, Jigar, you mentioned you're a guy who grew up in Illinois, and as you built your companies, both getting your foot in the door early on, and then how that evolved as you did have more success. How did you find yourself balancing establishing credibility to get in the door with folks, or to have meetings, or to drive forward with actually doing the work that over time builds up that credibility?
I think with all things, whether you're learning a sport or a hobby or starting a business, you have to start somewhere. And I was just telling the story last night to a bunch of engineers, just these memories I've had of just like really screwing up meetings and having no credibility and not knowing what I was doing. And it's like anything in life, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes and learn some lessons the hard way. And hopefully every day, whether it's work or practice, you get a little bit closer to where you wanna be.
I mean, look, I was born with an obnoxious amount of confidence. so like starting there. I completely agree. The thing for me that really helped me was understanding that there's only certain things that are important to your success over the next few months, right? And that changes every few months, right? And you really should stick to the stuff that's important for you for the next few months, right? It's extraordinary to me how many people want to get to 2 years from now, right now. And if you just focus on the next few months, those people actually want to talk to you because it's near term, it's right there, and you can actually get in front of them. And I also as someone who takes a tremendous amount of cold calls and cold emails, I wouldn't shy away from doing that. It's amazing to me how many people I meet at conferences like this who are like, I always wanted to email you, but I never did, and da-da-da, and here's what I do. And I'm like, you should have emailed me because I probably would have responded. So for me, it's really more about the focus piece than it is about the confidence piece, because I think people are far more willing to help unlock doors for you than you think, as long as you have a clear idea of what unlocking that door means to you and how it helps you, right?
Thanks.
Yeah, 2 more questions here, please.
Great, thank you. I've always enjoyed seeing successful entrepreneurs talk about their humble beginnings and then how they moved on and became this very successful company with such impact like the two of y'all have told us about today. And I'm wondering, as a small business owner myself, if you could share with us some of the big decisions, or at least at the time, they felt like they were big decisions, that you had to make, and how you ended up processing that and what you ended up doing, whether it was a decision to move into bigger space or to hire more people, or something about the governance of your companies that you can share with us.
So the science of this is actually fairly well understood, and so I'll start there, which is that you have to decide early on whether the business that you're creating is a lifestyle business or a very high growth business, right? Like, there really are two different businesses, right? So if you're creating a lifestyle business, then you grow within your means, right? So like, you only hire people that you can afford to pay, that you can't for a year, right? And then, you know, because you never want to lay somebody off, or you know, make these decisions that are, you know, more cautious, but you're like being profitable along the way, right? High growth businesses, by definition, if you're not betting the company like every 6 months, then you're not going to get there, right? You can't just like, you can't get to where you want to go as a high growth business and say, it all just fell in place for me. Like, when I needed a contract, I just asked for one and it came, right? So I'll give you an example. At SunEdison, we actually never raised money for the first 2.5 years. It was just like my home equity line of credit or whatever for 2 years. And it was basically, you know, you had to get other people to, you know, to do this and to that. And I think that the big thing that we bet the company on initially was winning this big contract in the state of California. At the time, it was 4.3 megawatts, which was larger than the entire U.S. market at the time. And, you know, and it took a lot of resources, it took a lot of money. It looked, at the time, I had to liquidate our bank account basically to get it done. And had we not won that contract, I'm not sure that we would still been in business. I think we did win it, and, you know, we like went on from there. And there were several other times where I bet the company. Like, we had a bunch of money in the account because we had an embarrassment of riches. We don't have to go into the details, but then we won this large utility contract, and, you know, we're a construction company basically when we first started it. So, like, you always get paid by other people to do construction, right? That's sort of the name of the game. We decided to just build the thing on balance sheet because our main investor like fell apart, and we needed like another investor to do it. And we cycled through 3 investors, and like the 3rd investor came in like a week before the project was completed, right? Like, it definitely would have sunk us if that investor hadn't come in that week, right? So like, we bet the company over and over and over again on people, on investors, on, you know, markets that we entered, and, you know, it worked out for us. You have to take calculated risk. You have to have very smart people. And the one other piece of advice I give you is that, like, I surround myself with people that beat me up all day, like all day. Like, if you look at my board at Generate Capital, they are a piece of work, right? They are constantly beating me up. But because of that, I get really good advice, right? And it's amazing to me how many people surround themselves with their friends, with, you know, like their neighbor down the street that put a $100,000 angel investment in them, et cetera, but nobody that actually asks them tough questions around the decisions that they're doing.
I think that's really great. I was going to say the same thing.
So this is for Jigar. I just checked my smartphone, and we generated 400 kilowatts of solar energy today in our company system. My wife drives an electric car. It's a Chevy. And what I wanted to do is get your opinion on the outlook for electric vehicles, given the state of the auto industry in the US. Because in Europe, by 2030, 2040, they're going to be, governments are saying it's going to be all electric. And what we're seeing in the US, particularly now, is that they've even taken off the mileage requirements for gas-powered vehicles. So what do you think is the outlook, competitive outlook for the US auto industry in electric vehicles?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, just to put it in some perspective, right? Electric vehicles took 20 years to sell the first 1 million vehicles. It took 18 months to sell the next 1 million vehicles. It'll probably be only 9 months for the next 1 million, et cetera. So it's growing. We're doing great, right? So we're financing 3 electric vehicle companies, and so I'm deep into this right now. But I think, so the problem with the European approach is the European approach, which I believe in, is the government regulation approach, is it's too heavy-handed. And what ends up happening is it costs the society way too much money. So like in Norway, they're basically providing a $40,000 subsidy for electric cars by removing the import tariffs on electric vehicles, which is why like 50% of all cars that are sold there are electric vehicles. And that basically is going to cost the country a ton of money, and, you know, they're going to get all upset because they're going to have big budget deficits. I think here, like, we really pride ourselves in figuring out how to succeed using like business model innovation and finance, right? And so what we've determined now is electric vehicles for fleet applications, by definition, in every fleet application is now lower on a cost per mile basis than gasoline and diesel car vehicles, right? And it's not because of fuel costs, which everybody's obsessed about. It's because of maintenance costs. Maintenance costs are like 90% less for electric vehicles than they are for these other vehicles. And so now it's like, how do you get the vehicles in the hands of these customers? And so we're innovating in that space, and that is something that we will do. So, you know, we'll be the first to like finance cost per mile financing instead of lease financing, et cetera, right? So we'll figure that out. I have no doubt in my mind we'll figure it out. But I think that but I would be cautious about pushing for over-regulation of pushing these technologies out. I'm for government's role in this because they have a role in infrastructure by definition. But I don't think that the CAFE standards will have anything to do with the trajectory of electric vehicles. It's more around entrepreneurs' ability to actually get people the comfort to do the right thing economically, which they're currently basically losing money on purpose because they're, you know, too shy to make these decisions. And entrepreneurs have figured out ways of solving that problem, and we're, you know, figuring out how to back them.
I have a last question for you both before I let you off. I mean, you're both two amazing guys that have built incredible things by following your intuition to some sense and having a strong sense of intuition. But I was wondering if you can tell me about a time when you didn't follow your intuition and you failed, and how you overcame that. You can mull a little bit.
Okay.
If you don't have an exact story, we can talk about failure generally.
I mean, I have kind of a meta answer, which is Reddit, like one of the key values on the platform is authenticity, and I've seen it many times over the years when somebody shows up on Reddit to do an AMA and they're not authentic, right? They're shilling for something, or they've got some other agenda that they're not being transparent about, and it goes really poorly, right? And that gets sniffed out, and we faced this challenge over this year of actually, how do we talk about Russia and misinformation and also not undermine our ability to do that investigation? And it was very frustrating for me to not be transparent about these things when we were still working on it. We just shared a bunch of stuff this week, which actually felt really good. But in the in-between there, it was very frustrating. I think lost a lot of credibility with the community during that time, because I felt like I was pulling my punches and wasn't being forthright, and it felt wrong the whole time, and I think we kind of paid the price for it as well. So yeah, I'm kind of living it.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I mean, Goldman was a really good partner on the project finance side. When we did our first financial raise in 2006, we had two other investors that I liked better. And my board basically bullied me into picking Goldman against my better judgment. And I knew it was going to be awful, and it was. It was just god-awful. And SunEdison, would have been a much different company had we not taken that money. And so I mean, I think the number one lesson I learned there was choose your investors wisely. And like at Generate Capital, like we've rejected sort of 80% of the folks who offered us capital, because like we just really need everybody to be values aligned around what we're all trying to do. And if they're not values aligned, then they push you to do things that just doesn't allow you to bet the company in ways that creates that next level of accomplishment.
Thank you guys so much. This has been awesome.